Back in 2009, it was if you were a kid playing football, you know this. Hey, kid, you got your bell rung.
hmm
It was perceived as weakness to treat a brain injury.
Welcome back to Brain, sponsored by Toro and Tides. March is Brain Injury Awareness Month, and to honor the importance of this month, Brain to Brain is shifting to weekly Friday drops in addition to our Tuesday Talk episodes. So, for Brain Injury Awareness Month, you're getting two episodes every week. These Friday episodes will feature leading voices in medicine, advocacy, and lived experience, all focused on recovery, awareness, and improving life for the brain injury community. Today's guest is someone who's had a real impact on the brain injury community. I'm sitting down with David Kracke. His work isn't mainly clinical or research based, it's structural. He's helped change laws, school policies, and support systems that affect thousands of survivors and families navigating life after a brain injury. David helped author and advocate for one of the first laws in the United States requiring return to play protocols for concussed student athletes. For years, he's been working at the intersection of lived experience and public policy, helping turn tragedy into real systems change. Right now, he is Oregon's brain injury advocate and working with the Center on Brain Injury Research and Training at the University of Oregon. And he's even helping me think through legislative reform in Puerto Rico, specifically how we improve long-term support, coordination, and visibility for people living with brain injuries. Today, we're talking about his advocacy origin story, how real policy change actually happens, and what still needs to be done for the brain injury community. David, welcome to our awareness series on Brain to Brain.
Evan, what a treat to be here. Thank you so much. It's really an honor, and I mean that. It's an opportunity for me to share my story, and not only that, for people to learn more about yourself and this wonderful, wonderful organization, Toro and Tides.
Thank you. So let's just dive right into it. Give us a little bit of your backstory and how you found yourself here today.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'll start with the who I am here today. Again, my name is Dave Kracke. It's with a K, Kracke, as you might be able to see on the Zoom. I currently work at the Center on Brain Injury Research and Training, or CBERT, at the University of Oregon. I've been an attorney in Oregon since 1990, so that makes it 36 years. Can't believe it. And I've been Oregon's Brain Injury Advocate Coordinator since 2018. It was a position that was recommended by the governor's task force on traumatic brain injury, and one that I was extremely honored to be asked to fill back in 2018 after that final report from that task force was issued. My backstory really started a long, long time ago. I often get asked, what's your connection with brain injury? Do you have any personal experience? And well, I do have personal experience, both myself and my brother and my little sister. Fortunately, those brain injuries that the three of us sustained back in the day have resolved, have healed, and I am very fortunate to feel like I am not living with any effects from that. However, when I was really young, I went over my handlebars. I landed on my chin. This was obviously well before the years of the helmet. Fractured my jaw in three places. Was knocked unconscious. So by definition, had a significant brain injury. That was very, very traumatic situation for me, for a young 9-year-old boy. A few years later, my little brother, I grew up in Southern California. This was kind of the start of surfing and skateboarding. He took a fall on his skateboard, again, no helmet, fractured his skull from ear to ear, suffered some pretty significant retrograde amnesia, and was for a long time saying, where am I? Who am I? Who are you? Looking at my mom, it was just a very difficult situation. And then my little sister was an equestrian, a jumper. And I'll tell you that to this day, that continues to be one of the most difficult, one of the most dangerous sports that kids can be involved with. She had multiple concussions falling off of her jumper horses in various situations. So I didn't know it back then. We didn't talk, nobody talked about brain injury or concussion other than, yeah, you have one, maybe you have one, but nothing much beyond that. But nonetheless, it really gave me an insight into A, what it's like personally, and B, what it's like to have a loved one experience brain injury. I always had leadership roles throughout my educational career, starting as early as elementary school, through middle school and high school, and then ultimately into college. I graduated in 1984 from the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, was a student senator for the College of Humanities there for a couple of different years. It was great work. I learned how the political system worked, actually got my start in politics as a political consultant back in the old days and learned a lot about political strategy through that work. Um, Ultimately went to law school, started law school in 1987 at Lewis and Clark Law School here in Portland, Oregon, moved here in 1987 for law school. I've been here ever since, graduated in 1990, passed the bar in 1990 and was a litigator. I tried cases, and I tried cases on behalf of plaintiffs. I represented people with catastrophic injuries, and many of them had brain injury, including in 2002 working with a young woman who was carjacked. And through the circumstances, she was dragged across the parking lot of the Safeway where she was shopping by her own car. Her dress got caught in the door as it slammed shut as the carjacker drove off. She fortunately, when her dress finally ripped about 100 feet down the road as she was being dragged, she rolled away from the car, which was obviously fortunate, but nonetheless left her with a pretty significant brain injury as well as other injuries. And so I, as her lawyer, went to figure out how to get damages for her.
Mhm.
And the first place I looked were what was called uninsured motorist coverage. She was injured as an occupant, being dragged at least by her vehicle while someone else was stealing it. And I figured, of course, she's entitled to all of her benefits, including her non-economic damages, meaning pain and suffering and emotional distress, things like that. Well, I ran smack dab into what was called Coal versus Farmers Insurance, a case from 10 years prior in Oregon that stated very succinctly in the judicial opinion, it was an appellate case, that the statute says what the statute says, and the statute says if you're injured by your own car by your own car, period, you are not entitled to recover those non-economic damages. And so my first thought, of course, like yours, I can tell, is what are you talking about? I mean, the statute is there for a good reason. We don't want people to drive into oak trees, suffer injuries, and then be able to say, now, give me $1 million. I've been injured. That's something that we want to avoid as a society. However, when someone is being carjacked and suffers damages, it seemed to me to be wholly different, just entirely different, and it was. However, it was there in the law. Judge Demunes, the judge who, or the judge in the appellate division who wrote the case, said, this is a legislative fix, not a judicial fix. In other words, he wasn't going to be an activist judge. He was saying this is a statutory problem. This is something that needed to be fixed through the legislative process. I didn't have a lot of experience with the legislative process at that point, but I felt compelled to make sure that future clients and future people in general run into this same brick wall. So I set out saying, how do you fix this? What does a legislative fix look like? And that took me through the process. And in fact, the first time I talked to a friend of mine who was a state senator, he got pushback from a member of the opposite party who told him point blank, Charlie, if you change your view on the death penalty, I'll change the vote on your carjacking bill. And and Charlie called me that afternoon and said, Dave, I hate to say it, but I'm not changing my view on the death penalty. At that time, Oregon had legislative sessions every 2 years. And so over the course of those 2 years, the next 2 years, as we were going into that next legislative session, I built a coalition of trial attorneys, a coalition of insurance lobbyists, a coalition of stakeholders and others. And ultimately, long story short, that law was changed that in that next session. And that was huge. I learned a lot of lessons. I learned that it's not only good intentions, but it's also good work. It's knowing the system. I learned to bring those diverse positions together. I learned to expect resistance, to work through problems, the strength and the incredible value of compromise, but not compromise to the extent that you break. You know,
Hmm.
don't lose sight of what that goal is. So that caught the attention of folks at the Brain Injury Association of Oregon, and I was asked to join their board, bringing not only that newly learned legislative expertise, but also my legal expertise onto the board. And that was in 2005. So that kind of was the lead up to where we're going to go in this conversation.
Yeah. Wow. Dave, it's crazy. I get your origin story is fascinating. I hear people, who talk about, wow, Evan, you were a journalist and you were a sales rep. Like both, you're using both your skills and your talents now for your company and the podcast. And for you, I'm seeing all these stories intersect with each other. You have your childhood, the concussion, seeing your brother, your sister go through it, and then now with this trial with the carjacking, and then overturning Cole versus Farmers Insurance. This path led you in a specific direction, which is remarkable, and that kind of leads in to what happened in 2009 with Max's Law.
Yeah.
Right? This was something that was groundbreaking that you were on the forefront with. And I want you to share that with our listeners. But let's talk about that climate, right? So in 2005, you jumped on the Brain Injury Association of Oregon. And I don't think head injuries were taken as seriously as they are now in 2026. It's a lot different. The medical scope has changed. We've learned so much more about the brain. So you're in this revolutionary period when you jump on this board and you start working towards this incredible law that has changed the scope across the nation. So let's dive into that.
Sure, sure. Well, you know, uh, number one, as an attorney, my tools are my words, and so you just said something that I want to just bring up to you because it's not intuitive. You said head injury. And head injuries are distinct from brain injuries. Brain
Mhm.
injuries are a subset of head injuries, but not all head injuries are brain injuries. And so
Mhm.
I really like to make sure that I keep my focus on the brain injury. And so I just want to, don't mean to be nitpicking here, but I know
No, I
how thoughtful you are, and I just want to point that out.
I love that because you also you made a correction one of our first calls that we had where I said, "Oh, a traumatic brain injury." And you said, "Hey, let me just stop you right there because I'm speaking off of my own lived experience." And you said it's not just traumatic. There's
Yeah,
other forms of brain injuries, and that hit a light switch. I have bad
yeah,
short-term memory, but that stuck
yeah,
with me where it's all encompassing when you say brain injuries.
yeah.
You're right. A
And
head injury is different from a brain injury. So I
yep.
did misspeak there, and I'm glad you did correct me because it's important for our viewers to catch that.
Well,
A brain injury is so much more than just a TBI or a traumatic
and
brain injury.
that's a perfect segue into your question about where we were at in 2009, because we are, I mean, we say, we kind of think 2009, ancient history. That was 17 years ago. That is not ancient history in any stretch of the imagination. And so by that, I want to suggest that everything that we're doing now is new. Everything that we are doing now is going to be perceived in the future as the cutting edge, the crest of the wave with regard to recognizing brain injuries, understanding brain injuries, responding appropriately to brain injuries. What you're doing here, what I've done, it is all part of the literally this crest of the wave that we are on and have been on for about 17 years. Now, that is not to say that there weren't people doing things before. There absolutely were. The Brain Injury Association of Oregon started in the 1990s. My colleagues around the country, many of them have been doing this since the 1970s. So this work is not by any means brand new, as in terms of 2009. However, in 2009, something happened. Like you just said, a switch was flipped. There was a real brutal ignorance in 2009 about brain injuries, and especially about youth and brain injuries. In the NFL, our big kind of cultural barometer for brain injuries, back in those days, the targeting hits, the Ronnie Lott hits, the big horrible hits that are the stuff of nightmares, they were cheered. They were routinely cheered. They that's what we watched for. I mean,
Mhm.
it was like, whoa, look at that guy. What we didn't realize is that was just one more step towards chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. So in the NFL and extending all the way down into the Pop Warner leagues, and I'm going to stick with football just to kind of streamline it, but this was happening everywhere in soccer, in rugby, in hockey, basketball, baseball. Not yet. Boxing, although not yet. There's a kind of a carve out that's existed for boxing and MMA that I hope we can look at uh, uh, pretty significantly, especially in this current climate of kind of championing the MMA spectacle. But back in 2009, it was if you were a kid playing football, you know this. Hey, kid, you got your bell rung.
Mhm.
It was perceived as weakness to treat a brain injury. We would never ask or tell a kid with a cast on his leg to go out and play football or a cast on his leg to go out and play soccer. But for some reason in 2009 and before, with our brains, it was okay. And at the time, we were sacrificing cognitive health for the kind of this dream of fame and fortune. There was a sense of, use the players, some are going to rise to the top, to that fame and fortune. But once they're there, even when they're there, they're there for us. It's this big spectacle, and what happens after they're off the field, we don't really care about. But a couple of things were happening kind of under the current. Number one, if anybody has seen the wonderful movie Concussion, we know that that was the time that um, uh, 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 Dr. Amalu had dissected Mike Webster's brain, the NFL player, a few years earlier, identified what then would become known as CTE. There was a growing acceptance of CTE. The incredible doctors in Boston, Dr. McKee, Dr. Stern, Dr. Cantu, and others, of course, were kind of starting this medical education that was going out there in Oregon. We had the Oregon Student Activities Association and others like the Oregon Health Science University, led by these incredible doctors we have here, Dr. Jim Chestnut, Dr. Mick Kester, and others who were creating kind of what would become the framework of the youth return to play protocols. Uh, but it was without question Max Conrad and the tragedy of Max Conrad. Do I have a time to kind of tell Max's story?
I think it's important too.
Yeah, Max in 2002. So again, this is right when I'm doing that work with the carjacking case. Max was the senior quarterback at a high school on the coast of Oregon called Waldport High School. 4.0 student. He was on his way to Cornell, king of the campus. Great guy, great guy. Was allowed to play, or he was playing quarterback in a Friday night game, and he got concussed. And the following Friday, despite the fact that Max was still suffering from signs, symptoms, and behaviors consistent with a concussion, he was allowed to start that next game. And, I've seen the game film, and the hit that he took in that second game it's not dramatic, but it was enough to concuss his already concussed brain. And it led to what at the time we called second impact syndrome. That diagnosis has kind of fallen out of favor a little bit, but the result is the same. If a person is concussed while their brain is still recovering from a first concussion, that leads to this cascade of cognitive neuro injury that in Max's case caused him to collapse on the field. He was in a coma. He stayed in that coma for 4.5 months. When he emerged from that coma, he was severely brain injured, permanently brain injured. And so he went from a young man having a life full of promise, just spread out in front of him, to someone who needed constant around-the-clock care. Now, I do want to give a big shout out to my colleagues up in Washington State, just north of Oregon, obviously, who literally at the exact same time were pursuing their own youth return to play law, post-concussion return to play law called Zach's Law or the Leidstedt Law. And it was just this incredible confluence. We weren't aligned. We weren't doing things together, but it was Max in Oregon and Zach in Washington and these teams behind. And I want to make very clear, I was a team member on the legislative team. I was by no means the leader of, well, I was a leader, but I was not the leader on that effort. There were so many great people working really, really hard to understand what we could do in response to this. But how we got there was Ralph Conrad, Max's dad. And Ralph came essentially, and I'll just, metaphorically speaking, storming into the office of the Brain Injury Association of Oregon and said, "What the are we doing with our kids and brain injuries? And we have to do more." So we embarked using this stakeholder group, including Dr. Chestnut, Dr. Kester, some really enlightened legislators and lobbyists, folks at the Brain Injury Association of Oregon and others, to figure out what that framework would look like eventually.
Let me ask you this. So you're working on this framework. You have all this momentum going. Max's injury was in 2002, like you
Hmm.
mentioned, right? We don't see Max's law until 2009. You mentioned, that he was in a coma for 4 months. There's these simultaneous laws going. We have Zach's law in
Well, just
Washington,
just two. Yeah,
uh,
that
and
was
and
it.
so
Yeah.
it's snowballing. But we have a 7-year gap between these two things. Let's talk
Yeah.
about that resistance that was met, or why
Yeah.
why it took so long. Talk about, we mentioned climate, right? And how the climate has shifted drastically for the better.
Yeah.
It's been phenomenal.
100%.
Let's talk about that early resistance that you were met with. I mean, even with that case where the guy was saying, "Oh, you're going to change my mind on the death penalty, if you want me to change my mind on this law." I mean, almost comical,
Yeah.
right? So what did you
Yeah.
face in those early years?
Well, you know, I think you're, pointing out that lag between 2002 when Max sustained the injury and 2009 when the law is finally signed by Governor Kulongoski here in Oregon. Yeah, a lot did happen. I mean, first of all, nothing like this existed. This was a law of first impression. This was figuring out, I often say as an attorney, you show me a contract and I can analyze what's in that contract till the cows come home. I can tell you what every clause in that contract means, what every word means, how it relates to the other words in that contract. But where I really earn my money as an attorney is telling you what's not in that contract, what doesn't exist in it, what's left out, and why. And that's the same type of thought process that occurs when you're dealing with legislation like this, which is brand new. We're essentially, first of all, back up. A law affects everyone in a given jurisdiction. In our case, the state of Oregon, at the time, about 4 million people would be affected by this law in one way or another. Now, obviously, not all of them are going to be either playing or coaching or parenting someone who has a kid or a grandkid, whatever it might be, in youth sports. But nonetheless, that law is going to cover everyone in the state. And so it has to be a really deliberate and thoughtful process. We can't end up with a law that doesn't do what we hope it will do. And so some of that resistance includes just the obvious. Hey, this is going to be too hard.
Mm,
We can't do this. First of all, and not only that, we don't need it. What are you talking about? We can just educate our coaches. And
mm,
if we do it, we might be subjecting these teams to abuse. Now, the abuse is interesting. The law says if a coach, and by extension others, observe a player get a blow to the head or body that results in signs, symptoms, or behaviors consistent with a concussion, the coach must remove that player from play and cannot return that player to play until the expiration of 24 hours at least, and only with a release from a qualified healthcare professional. And qualified healthcare professional is defined in statute. It's evolved over the years, but it's primarily medical professionals with a deep understanding of concussion.
Mm.
There was a concern back in the early days that if we allowed this, if we had this law on the books, that opposing coaches would use it to remove the other team's best players. Literally, the argument was some opposing coach is going to say, "Hey, guess what? I watched your star quarterback take a blow to the head or body that resulted in signs, symptoms, and behaviors consistent with a concussion, and you shall remove that player from
Jeez.
play, and he or she can't come back in." Okay, that was a concern. I'm very happy to say that didn't happen.
Mm.
That just did not happen. So the big kind of reluctance was the sports culture in general, the newness factor, and the potential for abuse, and kind of a lack of understanding of why we even need it. What is a brain injury anyway? Come on, it's just rub some dirt in it. You just got your bell rung. Get back
Mm.
out there. What are you doing? But I'm really honored, really proud to say that Max and Ralph and their story and the science, the medicine, it was too compelling. It was
Mm.
too compelling to ignore. Now, I will also suggest that Oregon's progressive values had something to do with it. Oregon has never shied away from being a leader in many areas that are considered progressive that I think are absolutely correct, such as environmental protection. We were the first state with the bottle bill, landmark bill. And we are the same with our brain injury work. Oregon is widely considered to
Oh yeah.
be a leader in this area. And I think that a lot of that is because we understand the value of moving forward. We also, one of the other things is we had such a great team of advocates here. So, a lot of different skill sets that work together to create this incredible law.
And that makes a huge difference having that team and that network. It's funny doing research on Max's law. I grew up in Texas. I went to high school in Texas, and there's a law called Natasha's Law that wasn't passed until 2011. I was a
Yeah,
senior
well,
in high school,
Natasha's Law was the Max's Law version that passed in Texas.
which is
And believe it or not, Texas was one of the leaders in the national movement, passing Natasha's Law only 2 years after Max's Law.
which is it's wild to think. I was a senior in high school, and I
Hmm.
specifically remember our running back junior year got his bell rung. Helmet flew 10 yards off his head, and then it wasn't taken as seriously as it is today. It was alarming, and he got up, walked off the field. I was like, is he going to take another snap? He didn't that game, but it's
Yeah,
just the optics have changed completely, and I want that to segue into this. So you have been so incredibly helpful. Living in Puerto Rico now, it's not as cohesive. There's not anything similar to Max's Law. There are certain medical stuff that must be performed, but it's not clearly defined or wildly enforced. Which is it's frustrating. It's sad because it's putting these kids in jeopardy, and that's what you and I are working on with this legislative process. And for me being unfamiliar with it, it's frustrating because I want quick results.
hmm,
And then, lack of nailing down an appointment to meet with the senator's office or somebody that's willing to discuss this. So I want our listeners to understand the process to begin this legislation. How do you even form it? We're in the process of it right now, but break it down in simple terms for our listeners.
great. Yeah, it's deep water. I'll tell you what, it's water that you have to tread into only with knowledge and essentially protection. I have been doing this, like I said, since 2002. I have either authored or co-authored 12 different laws, including a law that passed in Texas, post-concussion return to school law passed in 2025 in Texas. And so, through my long experience and obviously through my legal training, I've got a pretty good idea of how to navigate it. That being said, I've worked with some people who have failed to recognize the sharks swimming in the water, to keep the metaphor going, and have been routinely devoured and set their cause back as a result. And so, what I'm really getting at is that you're moving forward from idea to statute really requires a thoughtful strategy. The most important thing that I have learned over the years is, well, first of all, let's talk about the genesis. It always starts with an idea. And ideas in the human condition, we are subjective beings. I'm seeing you, you're seeing me. My self-consciousness, you're your own. And so there's that recognition of the inner self, the inner thought process that occurs. And that, in my experience, is where much of my legislative work has begun. It's begun literally at this desk. This is my home office where I am thinking about a problem or thinking about a situation. I'll go back to that example I used about the contract. Look at the social contract that is out there, everything that we have that controls us from a legal standpoint in society. And the real important thing to do at that point is to say what doesn't exist, what's not in that contract. That's what we did with Max's law. That's essentially what I have done with all of the laws that I have authored and co-authored. So it starts with an idea, and that idea has to go from the amorphous thought into a concrete form. So I will literally sit here at my keyboard and start figuring out what that language might look like. Statutes, I would urge any of your viewers to take a look at a statute. Every state has their own statutes. The federal government has their own statutes. All of these agencies have rules and regulations, and they fit kind of a set pattern. And you start typically with a definition, defining the terms within it. Then you go into kind of an example or an explanation of the why behind it, the why we need this, and then into the how we are going to do it. So when you break it down into those component parts, it's really intuitive. You start with the what we need, you move into the why, and that incorporates the why we need it. Then you develop the how it's going to work. The problem is that my idea of how is not the way that others think about how. And so one of the most important lessons as far in this process is to understand who the key players are and are going to be. A strategy that I have always used because it's so effective is to bring all of those stakeholders together well before the bill is ever drafted, well before we're even approaching a specific legislator to sponsor anything, unless, of course, the legislator is part of that core stakeholder group, which certainly has happened in my experience. And we brainstorm. We figure it out. We really hash out what are we trying to do here and how are we going to do it. When you bring those stakeholders in and you allow those stakeholders to become part of that process, the quote co-authorship process, a, a weird phenomenon occurs where people develop ownership. You either let people take something away from a draft statute or add to a draft statute. Obviously, it needs to be consistent with your message. I have had situations where, quote, stakeholders have come in and added things to statutes that literally are torpedoes, would ruin the whole thing. And it was like, wolf in sheep's clothing, nope, we're not going to listen to you. But I'm talking about the general collaborative, cooperative process. You want to get as many core experts involved in that process as possible. Let's look at Ralph. Ralph Conrad, Max's dad. He brought the emotion. He brought the real life need. He didn't, however, have the legal expertise or the medical expertise or the policy expertise or the political expertise, but he had that core need. He had that core drive. He had that most fundamental emotional argument of the why. So he was obviously a huge part of that. So once you get that coalition developed or that created, and you allow that guidance and compromise and ownership, ultimately you're going to come up with draft language. Now, the draft language that I have is not ever going to be the same draft language that comes out of what's called legislative counsel. Legislative counsel are the lawyers that work for the legislature, and they will put what we create. Now, obviously, I have a really good idea what legislative counsel is going to do with it. I draft it, make sure that it's drafted in a way that legislative counsel will understand, that they won't let the real meaning of it get lost because they aren't interpreting it correctly. I'll even work with legislative counsel when their first draft comes back and say, nah, you missed this, you didn't do this, we need this, you took that out, we need it because it relates back to, whatever the detail might be. So you find that legislative sponsor. He or she then sends it to legislative council. The bill comes back. Now it's in what's called bill form. It's got a bill number. And now that's a really big deal because now you got something that you can attach others to. And now so you look at what I've kind of been describing here is the idea person, that's this core, that's this central. Then that first group is that first concentric circle around that core idea. Then we bring in the legislator and the legislative council for yet another concentric circle. Now we have a bill, and now we can open it up to the stakeholders, and we can develop a stakeholder coalition. We can essentially tell the story. There's an adage that if you want a private benefit, some sort of corrupt or otherwise private benefit, turn it into a public need, a public story.
Hmm.
I find the flip side, the mirror image of that adage to be entirely appropriate with the legislative process, and that is if you want a public, if you have a public need, convince people of that public need through those private stories.
Hmm.
So in this process of stakeholder development, we're doing a lot. We're showing the legislators in the future that we have huge coalitions across the state and across diverse interests. We are also honing the experts, the storytellers who are going to be part of the hearing process. Because once it becomes a bill, if you're lucky, then hearings are going to be scheduled. And you're going to need people to testify to the legislators as to why the bill makes sense and why they should support it. I organize hearings. That's one of my key roles as Oregon's brain injury advocate. And in my strategy behind organizing a hearing is that I want each individual who testifies, and usually it's about 8 to 10 people, I want each of those witnesses to be part of the puzzle so that when they all are done, that puzzle picture is clear. No one person is going to tell the whole story, myself or anyone else, but together we tell that whole story. Now, if there's a fiscal impact, meaning if this bill is going to cost money, now you have the added step of having to go to what's called the Ways and Means Committee. This is true states and or federal. These are the folks that control the purse. These are the folks that you have to now really convince that the state's scarce financial resources are going to be well spent supporting this bill.
Hmm.
You need to communicate the need. You need to communicate the efficiencies, communicate the risk abatement. Obviously, the core with Max and Jenna, the follow-up law, and others is the cognitive health of our children. We need to protect their potential. You can create these kind of short, telling it all in a sentence, kind of slogans, if you will. Protect their potential is one. That was one we used effectively. Um, and then if you get through that hearing with what's called a due pass resolution, it goes to the full either House or Senate, depending on where the bill started. It starts either on the House side or the Senate side. If you are lucky enough to get a passing vote in the that first chamber, then it goes over to the other side. Let's say it starts in the House, now it goes to the Senate, where it goes through a whole nother set of hearings. And the senators might now say, well, no, I want to amend it. If they amend it and it passes, then it goes back to the House and the amended version is voted on again. If it gets through that process successfully, then it's on to the governor on the state level, president on the federal level. If the governor signs it, that is when you can just take a deep breath and say, job well done.
Mm.
We got to the starting line because now it's all about enforcement and making sure that the darn law is followed. So, congratulations. Now the work starts.
All right, David, you threw a lot at our
Oh, I'll tell
listeners.
you, like I
And
said, it's deep water.
I'm gonna just obviously I was taking notes throughout the entire course of what you were saying, so I'm gonna just break it down quickly for them
Yeah.
because I think what you just said could be a deterrence for some people. Whoa,
Oh,
whoa,
yeah.
whoa, whoa. Like I know there's this problem, but I'm not going to do all those steps. So you notice a problem, you read through statutes, you see if there's any holes or things you can change, then you bring together stakeholders. You want to get as many core experts as possible on what you're trying to change. You come up with draft legislation. You find a legislative sponsor. Then you have a legislative council draft. And then that bill comes back with a bill number. If it's approved, then you can attach that to other people. Develop a stakeholder coalition. Once it becomes a bill, hearings will be scheduled and people will testify, usually 8 to 10. So, oh my gosh, I have to find all these people. Then you have to go to the Ways and Means Committee if it requires money, get their approval. It goes to House or Senate. You have to get a passing vote. When it is passed, it gets sent to the other side. They can amend it. It can be sent back. If it's approved, then it could be sent to the governor or president to be signed into law, which is
It's that easy.
insane, David. So, okay, this is a question for you because you've been guiding me through this process. I was going in blind. That's why we have these monthly, bi-weekly calls where you're helping me, you're informing me. I didn't know it was all these steps. I mean, but I mean, ignorance is bliss in some extent because it's, whoa, I didn't know I was going up against freaking Goliath here. But it's
Uh-huh.
cool. For me, that's a challenge, and I love challenges. And I'm excited to embark on this journey, which with you as you help me through this. But a lot of people at home that notice this problem don't have a David, right? Or somebody to help them get through this process. And they might think, I'm not getting off the couch. This is impossible. What would you then say to them in that mindset?
Well, the good news is that there are in pretty much every state, and I'm talking specifically about brain injury advocacy. You can find state organizations who are already working in this area, who typically will have people who are skilled in this process. Quite frankly, those folks could reach out to me. My door is open for that. There is a national organization called the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. Notice head injury, not brain injury. NASHA. They are incredible people there, and if your state is has members of NASHA, you have access to experts there. The Brain Injury Association of America has some chapters around the country now. But the bottom line is it's daunting. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
bottom line is I'm an attorney with 36 years experience, 22 of which are in, or 24 of which are in the field of brain injury policy. I'm an expert. This is something I've been doing. And again, this is why I do caution people on just thinking it's, a wade in the kiddie pool, because it isn't. But Evan, you reached out to me. We talked. We realized we found the areas where change is needed, and now we're going to work through it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if something that I have always done is break things down to their component parts while keeping an eye on the long game, absolutely. And let me be very clear, this is a long game. Nonetheless, it's that adage, one foot after another, one step, journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step and continues with many, many more single steps. And so, you can get there with the proper guidance and coalitions and stakeholders. And the other thing is to remember, and this is a critical piece, is that it doesn't always happen right. It doesn't always work. In fact, in Oregon in 2023, we passed our Brain Injury Resource Facilitation Office. The Oregon Brain Injury Program now exists, and that is a statute that I literally wrote right here. However, it took 3 tries to get that law passed due to, in the first 2 sessions, due to some roadblocks that we hit. And for the third time, as we started, as I was talking to my stakeholder group, I said, "Folks, we got, we got one choice. We can, or 2 choices. We can put our shovels down and stop digging and walk out this tunnel that we've been digging for the last 2 sessions, and say, well, we gave it a good try, or we can keep those pickaxes and shovels going and see if we can break through this mountain."
Mm.
And we broke through it, and we broke through it successfully. And now Oregon has a brain injury program that provides resource navigation, service coordination, advocacy, and options counseling to Oregon's brain injury survivors, their loved ones. It's free of charge. It's just a phone call away for our citizens, and they get person-centered, trauma-informed, geographically relevant. Oregon's a huge state with many different geographic locations, urban, rural, and frontier. So we're giving these folks the information that they need. So yeah, it does require and your scenario, it does require teamwork, and your scenario is much like what Ralph Conrad was faced with. Ralph, a man with an emotional need for this work and not a way to get it done. And so he just started yelling in the wilderness. He came
Mm.
across us. We heard him loud and clear. And even though it was this daunting law of first impression, we said, yeah, let's do it. Let's
Mhm.
do it. Let's figure this out.
I think
And
it's
it
so
turns out we
important.
got it right that time. Yeah.
So
I do want
important
to tell
for,
one little story though,
yeah.
because sometimes that whole effort culminates with a coda, with an exclamation point that is just remarkable and unforgettable. And that happened with Max's Law. Max was on this incredible 7-year journey from terrible injury to the law being passed. When the gavel went down in the House committee to pass it out of the House with a unanimous do pass resolution, Max was in the audience, as was myself. And when the representative pounded that gavel, Max stood up in the gallery. Never seen this before. It was just so awesome and so cute. And the representative, the chair of the committee was named Representative Gelser, now Gelser Bluen, but at the time Representative Gelser. And Representative Gelser said, "It's passed." Max stood up and yelled, "Go Gelser! Go Gelser! Go Gelser!" And he just had this expression of emotion that was so spontaneous and wonderful and from his heart. And it literally, all of that stress that all of us had felt during this long journey to get it from idea to law just was encapsulated in the joy we felt was encapsulated in Max cheering that legislator who pounded the gavel. It was
What a beautiful
and
moment.
I know Representative Gelser Blue or Senator Gelser Blue and now remembers that. I talk to her often, and when I do, we bring that up. In my career, it was just one of the highlights.
Absolutely. And I think that's a
Yeah.
good moment for our listeners to hear, because it takes years. It takes a lot of
Yeah.
hard work, but it's much bigger than the person writing it. It affects an entire community, which is it's so needed for our brain injury community. And it kind of leads into the next question I have for you. You are an expert in this field. Where are the biggest structural gaps for brain injury support nationwide that you see?
Um, I think that those structural gaps are in the return to school, post-concussion return to school. Like I said, we passed House Bill 3007 in 2025 here in Oregon. In my opinion, it's the best post-concussion return to school law in the country. I know that Massachusetts and others have really good laws as well, but I just love what we did here. Again, it was a coalition of stakeholders that was wonderful. Created what is called the Immediate Temporary Accommodation Plan, ITAP, ITAP. Um, so I think that return to post-concussion return to school is really critical. I think that what we talked about, the nomenclature, the definition of brain injury versus TBI, I think that structurally is something that we need to look at. I think funding for research is critical. I think that there's another definitional issue that needs to be addressed structurally, and that is with quote unquote mild traumatic brain injury, MTBI. There's nothing mild about a brain injury, and yet our medical nomenclature is mild, moderate, and severe. It's an insult to people who have suffered quote unquote mild traumatic brain injuries. I think every state needs brain injury resource facilitation. The federal dollars for all states and territories to have a brain injury program needs to happen. We need to be focused on fall prevention. Falls are the number one cause of brain injuries. And as an the folks over 65 years old are the number one demographic for falls. And as the quote unquote boomers rush into old age, falls and brain injuries are going to become a real big issue, or even bigger than they already are. We have huge issues around people experiencing homelessness that need to be addressed. Conservative stats are 65% of people experiencing homelessness have a history of brain injury, with those brain injuries for the most part predating their homelessness. Brain injury in veterans is something that structurally we have to absolutely continue to focus on. I'm happy to say it's gotten better. The Department of Defense and the VA have listened. I spoke at the DoD VA suicide prevention national conference a couple of years ago. Title of my colleague Doug Gomez, a PhD at Siebert. Title of our presentation was Brain Injury Screening is Suicide Prevention, and we backed it up with statistics. And then finally, I think that we need to focus on our incarceration and justice involved individuals, because again, the statistics concerning how many inmates or adults in custody have brain injuries is staggering. It is huge. And if we recognize that, especially in the juvenile population of at-risk justice involved juveniles, we can stem that juvenile justice to adult justice pipeline that is so terrible.
Wow. A lot of stuff that still needs to be tackled
Yeah.
and worked on. Now,
Again, crest of the wave.
oh yeah, oh yeah. And if there's, there's only one Dave, right? And there's a lot of people that are also working to improve what we're seeing across the country. But this should be encouragement for other people to step up that are noticing these needs. What is the risk of nothing changing?
Well, first of all, everything is going to change. Change is just a given. The question is, what are the risks of things changing for the worse? I don't think it will. I think we have put in place some structural statutes and laws and public policy and public awareness and understanding that are going to survive anything. I think 50 years from now, people are going to look back. I think that return to play laws are still going to be in place. I think return to school laws, post-concussion return to school laws are going to be much more robust. I think people are going to look back at us and say, thank God our quote unquote ancestors did this. They figured it out. Um, but the risks are out there, and they could include generational ignorance. I've seen that a little bit recently with parents saying, "Why do we need these return to play laws anyway?" It's like, oh my God, what are you talking about? And that's a really unique generation right now, because they like you didn't grow up with the return to play laws. Now, 15 years later, they have kids who are or 18 years later who are now playing youth sports, and they don't have that institutional memory of themselves being subject to these return to play laws, so they're wondering about it. I was asked actually a few years back to go down and talk to a group of Pop Warner parents about the return to play requirements. And the first person I called after being asked was Max. I said, Max, I need you to show up and help me out with a presentation. And he said, what, in this point, Max, this is post, recovery, and he's cognitively able to do this. He's still impaired, but he's better. And he said, what do you want me to talk about? I said, Max, you talk about whatever you want. And obviously, what I wanted was for those parents to see what cognitive impairment looks like
Yep.
and say, this is the fire you're playing with. So that generational ignorance, we need to keep the why front and center on that.
Hmm.
Um, and I think we obviously still have a need for education and training with professionals. You still hear about medical doctors who don't really understand brain injury. It's like, what? So yeah, those are some of the kind of the hurdles, the risks associated with just assuming the status quo.
Mm. And
Yeah.
given those risks, right? I mean, it's nationwide, but you are actively working to, let's just call them fires, extinguish these fires, right? And continue that education. What's next for you? I mean, you're juggling so much, but I'd love for our listeners to hear.
Yeah, I think that first of all, I am in my mid 60s now. So what's next for me is probably 4 more years, 5 more years of doing this, knock on wood. And I feel very lucky because I've had years of alignment with this work. I am Oregon's brain injury advocate, very honored. I have used and continue to use my experience to help others, to educate, to help other states and territories like Puerto Rico achieve these statutory goals. I've been able to lead through example. I've been able to publish. I've been able to do podcasts, speeches, educate and train, veteran communities, educators, others, ultimately helping to train the future generations. And that to me is my next priority. And I brought this up recently in a presentation I did. Continuity, continuity of message. We had a problem in Oregon a while back where a leader decided that the leader was the mission and not the mission wasn't the mission,
Mhm.
and failed to kind of plan for the leader's retirement, and in doing so left a vacuum, and that was terrible. It had negative effect, and so I understand that the mission is literally it's a million times more important than me. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than any individual. In fact, it's a trap to think that you are the mission. And so I have really placed an emphasis on continuity, on helping people like yourself understand your power and understand that you are the future of this work. We've done a lot to provide that foundational work, but there's a lot more to do. The specific work that we talked about, the return to school, the Department of Corrections, laws across the country. And by that, I mean also across the world. Let's be
Mhm.
serious here. The United States is the leader in brain injury policy. There is no question. I have colleagues and friends across the globe, and they are behind where we are. So we are doing stuff that will again lead the entire world when it comes down to it. So my main mission right now is to make sure that the mission continues.
Mm. Powerful. And
Yeah.
it takes, I mean, it takes people willing to step up and advocate for that change,
Yeah.
which could be a hard ask for some people, but it's also as simple as Max sharing his story, which makes
Yeah. And,
uh
and it's also a recognition for someone like yourself. This matters.
mhm,
You're reaching people. You wrote
mhm.
that wonderful book,
Thank you.
that I'm really enjoying. And I loved seeing you at the national conference last week in Washington, D.C., and the coalitions that you were developing there. I'm having lunch with a young man who's from California who happens to be in Portland next week,
Mm,
who's a medical doctor down there, helping California now with a lot of these goals. And you and Daniel and others, you guys are the future. And
mm,
and yeah, it's daunting. I get that, but it's not insurmountable. You
mm,
can do it. I know, no one taught me this stuff. I figured it out for the most part. Now I want to take that back a little bit. I benefited from a lot of people who were smarter than me, more experienced than me in helping guide me along this process. but it's gotten me to where I am now, where I am, seen as one of these kind of these elders and one of these mentors. And now I see it up to you to recognize that internal power, to recognize that, yeah, it's hard, but it's not insurmountable. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm young, but you won't always be, trust me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
when you get to be my age, then you'll pass that torch to the next generation that's coming up. And in doing so, we will ensure that people, the brain injury survivors everywhere, are able to lead a better, more fulfilling lives, along with their caregivers, their family members, their other loved ones, their friends, their employers, their teachers, you name it. I mean, we are
That's the
dealing
most
with a
important
subject
part.
that touches so many people,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and we
caregivers,
need to
you're
do it.
right. It's
Yeah.
it truly ripples across families, friends, loved
Yep.
ones. All right. On a final note, Dave, because you've been so gracious with your time, you're already kind of touching on this, but you are on the brink of retirement, and it's not saying you're gonna leave the brain injury community behind, but your presence won't be as fierce per se.
I just
What
might
gives you
be
hope?
hiking a little bit more.
And you've earned it, as you
Yeah,
should.
exploring Oregon's incredible nature. Yep.
What with that being said, when you cross the finish line and hit retirement, which so many people look forward to, what gives you hope as you enter this new era?
Oh, I'm generally a hopeful person. I mean, that's really defined my kind of my outlook on life. I think that, integrity and hope go hand in hand. And so I've done my best to live a life with integrity, understanding that. And so hope for me is looking back, seeing the kind of the wilderness that we were in 2002 when Max was injured, to the really robust work that we are doing now in 2026. There's a lot to do. I have hope in the idea of progress, of awareness. I have hope in young people like yourself advocating for this. I have hope in the shrinking world, meaning the digital world and the internet and social media really allow us to reach each other across this world, which is great. I have a ton of hope in the science and the technology. I think that our diagnostics are going to be greatly enhanced in the future. I think our brain treatment is going to be incredible. I think that there are some breakthroughs happening right now in the area of stroke and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's that are going to be just gigantic as technology and science progress. I do have hope that AI, once we get through this adolescent or even youth period that we're in with it right now, where it's not really clear on exactly what it's going to be. But I've been reading a lot about AI. I have some hope that AI is going to, free up a lot of the burdens that a lot of our, people such as teachers, medical providers, caregivers have, which will in and of itself make room for growth. Um, I have hope that my colleagues, that I know from around the country and around the world are going to be there, that they're going to continue to work. I have hope that there will be a growing body, a growing group of experts. Um, I have hope knowing that I've helped people. You can't
Mm,
prove a negative. I'll never know how many kids did not suffer the same ravages that Max Conrad suffered because they were in fact taken out when they were concussed and not allowed to return to play, that they received the accommodations in school and weren't just kind of relegated to the dustbin because they failed some tests because their brain was healing. Um, so I have that, and I guess ultimately I have hope that I'll be content.
mm,
I was having a conversation with a mentor of mine, an elderly guy who I just love, and we talked about the idea of bookends. You start this
mm,
work, and then there's got to be an end to it. Again, that defined end allows for continuity beyond my end. It
mm.
allows for you to come in and continue the great work. So that in a nutshell is my hope.
Yeah, whenever you find that bookend, you can close this chapter knowing you've helped thousands of people in the brain injury community and probably saved lives as well. And in closing, Dave, I just want to thank you for helping so many people that find themselves in similar situations as myself, and living in an era in high school where this wasn't taken as seriously. You're saving fellow Maxes, and it's so important for the work that you've done, and the decades of work that you sacrificed and did for the brain injury community. I thank you so much, and thanks for your guidance and support, and for coming on this podcast. You were so informative, and our viewers and listeners, when they absorb this, this could be the spark of change that you've been asking for, and it's truly incredible. So thanks for coming on the show. You're always welcome to jump on the podcast with me, and I look forward to the future work that we're doing together.
Evan, I look forward to it as well. And I've really appreciated our growing friendship. And I just know that you've got great things happening both now and in the future. So, way to go.
Thank you so much, and thanks for listening to this segment of Brain to Brain. We'll catch you all on the next podcast.